if we were actually conscious of all of the sensory information coming into us at any one point, we would be completely overloaded. Most of our sensory information comes through visual. Let me give you some insight into brain chemistry. My good friend Dave Asprey from the Bulletproof team, amazing man, shared this with me, and that is that the brain, although it's 1/50th of the body weight, takes up 20% of the calories. 20% of the energy in your body goes to run your brain. Now, if that energy is low, guess what? You feel demotivated. And a lot of the time, people try to rely on willpower, but willpower isn't on demand. Willpower has cycles based upon whether your brain is being fed the energy it needs. So if you are feeling down and thinking, I was going to commit to that, but I can't, I'm just not in the mood, and you don't want to work harder, then first things first, go check your brain chemistry. Get yourself some fast sugars into the diet, some high quality brain fuel to be able to perk yourself back up at that level, then go do it. Another great way of setting yourself up to win is that when you're in the mood to do something, prepare something for when you're going to be doing the project. In other words, I'll give you an example. If you go to bed at night, put your gym kit at the bottom of the bed if you're going to the gym in the morning. Research has shown if you get out of bed and that gym kit is more than 20 seconds away, you're not likely to make it if you're not in the mood. But if your gym kit is at the foot of the bed and you get out and the first thing you do is put it on, you're ahead of the game. Set yourself up to win. So when I'm in the mood and I am energized, my brain chemistry is high and I'm associated to what I'm doing, do something in that moment to take action towards setting yourself up for when you know predictably that cycle is going to dip. Because you can't be in uptime all the while. That's a superhuman myth. So how do you go from being a person spinning the wheel in life, hoping that it's going to land on your color, versus becoming the house whereby every single time, over time, you know ultimately things are going to work out in your favor? Well, let me share with you an incredible part of the human anatomy that allows that to happen. It's called the reticular activating system. And it's a part of the brain that has a very specific job to do, and it's usually misunderstood. But the reticular activating system is really the gatekeeper between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And it has a sway over what information it allows in from the sensory input. Now, we all have 5 senses, as we know: taste, sound, sight, smell, and touch. And if we were actually conscious of all of the sensory information coming into us at any one point, we would be completely overloaded. Most of our sensory information comes through visual. For example, if you had an orchestra play different notes on the instruments all at once, you'd kind of be overwhelmed, confused. You wouldn't be able to understand it. But if all of a sudden you open your eyes for a split second and see a picture, just let's say half a second exposure, you'd probably be able to talk about that picture for 5 minutes just on half a second. That's how much more powerful the visual sensory input is, which is why 80% of the sensory processing information power of the brain is given over to processing visual information. Now, how do we make the reticular activating system work for us when we want to be quote unquote lucky? Well, we need to understand that it does one job and one job only, primarily for the purposes of this video. And that is, it allows in to our conscious information that falls under 2 categories. One is information that can be harmful to us, and the other is information that we vote on it being relevant. So for example, let's talk about the first type of information, stuff that can be harmful. So we're driving along and we're somewhat unconscious, as most people are, what I call sleeping awake, which is why you tend to drive to work on your day off, because you've done it so many times, you're unconscious, you're moving forward just out of habit. But we tend to wake up just as the car in front of us brakes that little early, it snaps us out. That's because the reticular activating system is constantly scanning for something that could be danger, and it works in conjunction with another part of the brain called the amygdala, whose job is to really notice things that are negative or dangerous before positive. So the amygdala will notice that, flag it up to the reticular activating system, bring it into your conscious awareness, while everything else, meanwhile, is swept under the carpet. So, and the amygdala is a fascinating part of the brain. As I say, if you're walking past a tree 10,000 years ago and you miss an apple, no big deal. But if you miss a snake, it could be a big deal. So it's always scanning in conjunction with the reticular activating system to see if there's anything in our awareness that could be dangerous, harmful, or threaten us physically. So in terms of the other information, what we tell it is important. Now here's where we start getting interesting when we talk about getting lucky. See, the reticular activating system will, as a faithful servant, irrespective of the nature of the input, do its job. So if you, for example, our name, we know our name is important to us. So if we're at a party and we're having a conversation with somebody and there's lots of background conversations going on, but somebody the other side of the room happens to mention our name. In mid-conversation, we will be pulled out and look over to see who mentioned our name across the room in the middle of another conversation. Why is that? It's because the reticular activating system is constantly scanning all of this information, and it's deleting, distorting, and generalizing 99% of it. Let's say, otherwise we'd be completely overwhelmed. And it's sweeping that under the carpet of our awareness, our conscious awareness, and just flagging up what's important. That's why we didn't hear somebody else's name, but we would hear our name. So if we tell the reticular activating system what is important, it will go and find it in the millions of bytes and bits of information a second that is being processed. So you could walk down the street and completely miss an opportunity because you haven't told the reticular activating system or your brain that it is relevant or important, even though it's looking at millions of pieces of information every second. If you want to look at one area that, out of the 4 stages of learning, that instantly triggers that, it's the second stage, where I'm now consciously aware of how useless I am. Yeah, I'm starting to learn French, and part of me's kind of there. I know what it is that I want, but I still feel uncomfortable trying to order a drink or a meal in a restaurant because it's not coming out right, and I'm wrestling with it. So I'd rather shut up and not say anything and just point to the picture. So most people quit at level 2 not because they're not clever enough, not because they're not intelligent, not because they don't want it bad enough, but because it triggers the fear that we're not enough. Now, one of the other latest things that have come out of neuroscience is the role of how we learn at a level of being able to transition through those 4 levels at a faster rate. How do we build talent? And there's a substance that's been ignored by science for many, many years because they didn't realize it was valuable, and it's a substance called myelin. And myelin is something that coats the actual neural connections, very similar to how plastic coats the wires that we plug our computers in so they don't electrocute our hands. They act as insulation because the brain is electromagnetic. Yeah, it sends electrical impulses. Now, another reason that we coat the wires on our computer is not just so we don't get a shock, it's why? Makes them more efficient. Yeah, there's less leakage. And so if we coat our neurons in myelin, then the neural connections happen 30 to 50% faster, and you learn very, very quickly. Now, what's very interesting about that, and by the way, that's when they looked at Einstein's brain, they were looking for mass, they were looking for size, and Einstein had an average size brain. In fact, one of the largest brains on record is that of an idiot. Size has nothing to do with it. Why is everyone looking at me when I say, oh, because I'm speaking? Okay. So it's not about the size of the brain, but when they re-looked and saw how much myelin had been produced, then it all started to make sense. But here's where it gets interesting. Myelin is built 10 times faster in the area of conscious incompetence. And it's an evolutionary thing. For example, now if we're starting to learn how to walk, we better start learning fast, especially when we live in a time, or we lived in a time, where things that ran faster than us could eat us. So, we need to learn quickly. And the best analogy that I can give, it's that place where it's almost like you're in a dark room with a blindfold and you're kind of bumping up against things and hitting your in. It's awkward and you're trying to figure it out. And a little bit later, you've kind of got the room mapped out, but you're still stumbling until a point where, you've gone through it enough where there's a chair here, there's a wall there, etc. But it's that sort of stumbling, coming back, figuring it out, repatterning, going back again. It's there that myelin is built 10 times faster than anywhere else and will catapult you through conscious incompetence through to conscious competence. So when we get frustrated, when we get overwhelmed, the response for most people is to quit, walk away. This isn't for me. I'm not cut out for this. I mean, you hear the language. Oh, no, I'm not cut out for this. No one's cut out for anything. You're cut out for everything. You may have a natural predisposition, but your heart will tell you where that is. Not trying to do something to prove that you're good enough. Yeah, you take your son to a doctor or a surgeon. You don't want to know he's a cut-out brain surgeon, do you? You want to know he went to school for 4 years and then went to medical college. And then, yeah. So, yeah, it's no excuse that I'm not cut out for this. You're cut out for everything. It's about going through those processes.